Welcome to the first installation of Get Inspired with Real Talk, and it is brought to you by GetInspired South West Florida. The host of today's session is myself, Shay Penry, as well as a friend of mine from Columbus, Ohio, Nancy Scotney. We rolled a wheel and it chose the following topics for our discussion today, which was emotional eating and supporting someone through grief or loss. So here we go. Let me spin the wheel. You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay.
The wheel
Drop.
of mindfulness.
Emotional eating.
Oh my God, dude, so much good, right?
I've realized lately that change is a big trigger for me for emotional eating. Anything could be a trigger, but change is
Well, it's a
definitely.
coping strategy for anything.
Yeah, and I do it mindlessly. I was talking to somebody the other day, right? Like, you know how, like, with your emotions, you're supposed to acknowledge them in order to get distance from it
Yep.
so we don't get absorbed into it. Well, I thought about trying to apply that with my eating. I know when I'm about to binge. I get off work and there's this thought in my head, I'm about to order up some Mexican and we're about to get down. You know what I mean?
Right?
Like, we're about to eat a quesadilla, we're about to slam on some cheesecake. Like, it's
We're just
going through
going to
my
go
mind.
all out since it's going to happen.
I recognize the thoughts there. I try not to think about it because I don't want to talk myself out of it, right? So I wonder if I turn towards it, almost say out loud what I'm about to do, like acknowledge it. I wonder if it would
Right.
help stop the behavior. I recognize that I'm about to about to get down on some Mexican food. Saying it out loud might really truly acknowledge it versus what I normally do, which is I try to ignore that that's about to happen because I don't want to talk myself out of it.
Yeah, and you don't want to shame yourself, right?
Right.
Because you want to do what you want to do.
Right.
Well, it's like any addiction, like the alcohol and cigarettes. It doesn't even have to be a trigger. It can be like, oh, I'm doing really good. I might as well just do it.
How do we change that?
What are the consequences of this? I'm going to feel like shit afterward.
But it is. It's just like an addiction because it's hard to bring with sufficient force that into your memory before you go forward and just do it. All right, let's spin.
Okay, good.
Big bucks, no whammy. Supporting someone through grief or loss.
Ooh, it's a hard one. I think it's something that everybody struggles with. I get myself in trouble all the time because I want to fix it. And that's not something you can fix. You have to be in it with the person. I have to really work on, okay, what space are you in? Why are you judging them? Or is this, stop fixing it? I frequently tell people, is this helpful? You want me to just listen? You know?
I like that. I like that. Although I think potentially they could come back and go, I don't know what I need.
Right. And sometimes it's just letting them talk.
I struggle with the judgment part, even though I've not lost anybody close to me. At some point, I'm sure I will. And when I do, I think that this will be an easier thing for me, maybe because I'll have a better way of relating to that person. But right now, like I have a tendency to have judgmental thoughts that they're not doing a good job managing their emotions. Because now that I've learned how to better manage my emotions, I feel like it's a suitable cure-all and that there aren't going to be things that are going to hit you so hard that you're still going to struggle through it, which I know that's not true because I've experienced that myself, but I know that that's my initial thinking when I encounter somebody else that's struggling with something,
Well, and that's what I mean by checking in with yourself. What do I need here? Okay, I'm judging. Stop. That's the whole stopping the process and just trying to hear and feel their emotions without thinking. That's part of being in the moment, mindfulness. See, this is a hard topic because there's multiple different types of scenario. Grief and grieving is a huge topic, something that you might grieve over, somebody else might not, but it doesn't mean it's not the same feeling. Loss of a relationship for you is really hard, right?
Yes.
That could be the same as a death. Grieving and grief isn't just to losing a loved one. So relating to the feeling and versus the
situation
is, I have a friend right now that's really grieving hard. She just had the gastric bypass, and it's just like everything is really hard right now. When you take something out and you're trying to fix it, it doesn't fix the things that are hurting inside.
Yeah.
So you can't comfort you. So she's going kind of squirrely. She calls me and says, want to work out? Do you want to try to stay busy and all that? And when she doesn't have something else or somebody else to calm that down, it puts her in grief mode. If you're taking away something that generally helps you feel better, and then you don't have that anymore, what are you left with? You're left with yourself. So
it goes back to relating and not comparing.
Yes. Your
Um,
story is different than everybody else's, but you still have had those feelings.
It is definitely something I have to remind myself to do. It's not something that comes naturally. And now here's the other thing that I struggle with. Let's say you can relate. What do you do with that relation? So, because my instinct is then I want to share how I can relate, but I don't think
Right.
that's always helpful because they're focused on what their issue is. They don't want you to turn it into what your issue is. In my mind, I feel like I'm trying to be helpful because I'm hoping that in the process of me sharing the relation that I have to what they are going through, that they'll maybe get something out of that they can use that might be helpful for them to process what they're going through. But I don't think that it does that in most cases. It's really dependent upon situations because at what point do you hold space for that versus not letting somebody sit in their shit and try to get them to live in a solution?
That depends on the relationship. I feel like you and I could have that conversation that you might get mad at me or might get mad at you or whatever, and then we'll come back to it. It depends on the relationship. I have people in my life, for instance, Julie. Things that are important to her are not important to me. I have a meltdown because somebody didn't hang up their bath towel. And for her, that's really important. And for her, when people don't do it, in her head, it's you disrespected what I want and what I value. And in her head, that means they don't care about what my feelings are.
It really does take a lot of emotional intelligence to really hear what that emotion is. Okay, there's this self meditation I did for the mindfulness class that I hosted, and in it talks about imagine a situation that you've gone through recently that was really hard for you. And basically in this process, they tell you acknowledge how hard that was for you. Acknowledge the feelings that you were encountering as you were going through that situation. It's amazing how important just acknowledging something is. And so maybe not just for that person to acknowledge it within themselves, but I think that's how you be there for them. Like you're saying, is helping to hear that you are acknowledging that for them.
Just say, oh, I can imagine that you're feeling scared. Right. That's scary. Or you felt scared, dude.
Yeah.
But first you have to acknowledge in yourself. You may not understand or relate, and this might not affect you the same way as it affects somebody else, but you certainly know. It's what makes a good therapist is because they can do that.
Well, yeah, because you have to be able to do it quickly to be able to hold that presence with somebody and be effective. And then also you say don't listen to the story, but it's really hard to be able to try to put yourself in someone else's shoes if you're not trying to think of that story that they just told you, and even maybe trying to think of how that could compare to something you have gone through. And like,
because
how do you...
you're not listening to the actual story itself, because the story is what it is. You're listening for key words, key feelings. You can hear it and see it and feel it in people, right?
Sometimes.
My relationship with Julie, she hasn't had the trauma that I've had. She hasn't had consequences I've had. She hasn't had any of the experiences I have, but she has feelings, and I can relate to the story as far as her saying she's frustrated.
Yeah.
So I can think, oh my God, if I was frustrated, what would I need? I'd need an acknowledgement. I would need, and if it was me being part of it, what she needed to hear was, I'm sorry, and here's what I'm willing to do. And then explain to her that it's not a personal thing. There's two people in the house that drop towels on the floor, and we don't do it to sit there and say, oh, let's make Julie have a bad day, you know?
Right.
So I've had to explain that, but at first I had to own up. I had to say, oh, it sounds like you're really frustrated. And this has been a battle, and I finally succumbed to it. It's finally just like, okay, I don't have to understand it to have empathy. And it's helped tremendously. Now she's not pissed occasionally when there's a towel on the floor, because for the majority she's felt heard.
Practice is key, but it's also just being really present in that conversation. Yes. Because what happens to me a lot of times, I'm so wanting to get the right response. I want to be able to react in the appropriate way that I then kind of... Yeah, I start thinking in ahead of what they're telling me at that moment. And so then I'm not able to connect to the emotions. And instead of that, I start feeling stressed out, right? I start getting anxiety. And
that's what happens to me. And I get overly fixate. And then I get frustrated because it's not the response they want to hear.
Right.
And that's all about checking in with my body and my day. Can I hear this right now? Okay, so what happens with me with Julie is she can get home from work and be grumpy, and it just pisses me off because it irritates me. Like, how do you get home and you're grumpy already? You know? Or how do you wake up grumpy?
Oh, yeah.
It's a trigger for me. And I had to look at my childhood, my life. I was constantly on edge because you never know when my dad is going to be grumpy, and it sets the tone for the whole house, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for me, what was my job? Fixing it, calming him down, reassuring my mom. So for me, it's a huge trigger. So I go into automatically pissed off at her. I'm like, dude, really? And then, so I don't have space for her unless okay, I'm frustrated. Stop listening to the story. I get why you're triggered. And after I listen to her, I get to explain to her how it makes me feel to have somebody grumpy and not understanding why.
Yeah.
Like the walking on eggshell feeling,
Mm-hmm.
and that wasn't her intention.
Thanks for listening to Get Inspired with Real Talk. Make sure that you've subscribed to this channel so you'll get updated and notified of any additional recordings. Also, be sure to check out the website GetInspiredSWFL.com. You'll see any of our amazing inspirational upcoming events posted out there, as well as any free online courses. You'll find our blog, and you'll get to check out a link to our Facebook community and a link to this YouTube subscription.